Athelstan told Ragnar his decision that he had found his faith again. Upon hearing Athelstan's words, Ragnar felt happy for him. But Athelstan told Ragnar that he could no longer continue to believe in the gods, and so he planned to leave Kattegat. The smile on Ragnar's face immediately disappeared when he heard this, and he asked Athelstan to stay. He stated that Athelstan was the only person he could trust, and told Athelstan that he would protect him. Meanwhile, Floki also told Bjorn about Athelstan's betrayal of the gods. He then gave Bjorn the bracelet that Athelstan had thrown away and told him that he would settle the matter. Soon, a large number of ships began gathering at Kattegat. Kalf brought Earl Siegfried to join Ragnar's team, and Horik's son and Borg Earl's widow also followed along. For the sake of greater benefits, they temporarily put aside their previous hatred. When Athelstan appeared, everyone at the banquet fell silent. Everyone was hostile towards him. Only Ragnar was always the same. That night, while Athelstan was preparing to pray, Floki burst in and killed Athelstan. Ragnar quickly learned of Athelstan's murder, so he took Athelstan's body to the mountain to bury him. And this was exactly the place where he first learned Christian doctrines from Athelstan.
You're a brave man, Athelstan. I always respected you for that. I always believed that death is a fate far better than life. For you will be reunited with lost loved ones. We will never meet again, my friend. I have a feeling that your God might object to me visiting you in heaven. What am I to do now? I hate you for leaving me.
After burying Athelstan, Ragnar shaved his hair and wore Athelstan's cross. Ragnar led the Viking fleet towards Paris. Soon their flotilla reached the city of Paris, and Count Odo spotted the Viking flotilla. He quickly rushed to the palace to report to the king. Count Odo stated that he had proposed to reinforce the city defense and cut off the river to block the Viking attack, but nobody believed him. But thankfully, he had stored a lot of food and water before that. As long as they hold on to the city of Paris, the Vikings will be driven back sooner or later. Count Odo suggested that the king evacuate, but was blocked by the princess, who said that the king should stay and protect his people. Then the king announced that he would stay in Paris. By this time, the Vikings, after a long journey, planned to camp outside the city to prepare for the upcoming combat. Rollo took a part of the people close to the city walls for reconnaissance. The walls were very high and they had powerful crossbows. Rollo reported what he'd found to Ragnar. Then Ragnar handed over the command of the battle to Floki. At this time, Rollo proposed his idea, suggesting that they could attack from the water and land simultaneously, while Floki would construct siege equipment. Count Odo also learned about the Vikings' reconnaissance. He knew the Vikings may attack at any time. The king was worried, but the princess and Count Odo were very confident. Soon the Vikings had built siege towers and ladders, ready to launch an attack any time. Looking at Paris, the Vikings were thrilled. At the time, King Ecbert wanted to control the kingdom of Mercia, but Quenthrith didn't give an inch. She beat King Ecbert's minister who stayed in Mercia and sent him back. So King Ecbert arranged for his son to go to Mercia to negotiate with Quenthrith. Lord Ethelwulf told Quenthrith that if she did not submit to Wessex, his father would launch a direct attack on Mercia. However, Quenthrith remained calm, stating that she had Ragnar's son, and he would surely help her. But Lord Ethelwulf informed her that the people Ragnar left in Wessex have been entirely killed by them, so Ragnar wouldn't be able to help her. On hearing this, Quenthrith became panicked and had no choice but to compromise. On the outskirts of Paris, Viking forces divided into two groups, one preparing to attack the city gate from the land. It seemed everything was going according to plan, and the entire city of Paris had fallen into a tense and heavy atmosphere. Lagertha stood in front and commanded, waiting for the horn of attack.
Shield wall! Wait for my signal!
Ragnar and Aro led the remaining people closer to the city wall. After Floki blew the horn, everyone sprang into action. Lagertha commanded the battering ram to smash into the city gate, but it had no effect. So Kalf initiated the second plan, and the city gate was soon breached. However, when the city gate was opened, there was no one to be seen, just a narrow passage. Yet, this strange scene did not deter their advance. At this moment, the drawbridges in front of them started to come down slowly. Calf instantly realized the trap. He tried to stop everyone, but his efforts were futile. Therefore, he had to forcefully take Lagertha away. In an instant, the Vikings got trapped between the city gate and the drawbridge. This trap left them with no escape. A brutal battle began outside Paris. The Vikings tried their best, but still could not scale the city walls. Using all their strength, the city's defenders fended off the Vikings' fierce attacks. The battle seemed to demonstrate the Vikings' aggressive nature, but the reality was heavy losses for them. Nonetheless, the Vikings eventually stormed the city walls. When Count Odo heard the news, he rushed up the city wall himself. At this moment, the princess appeared on the city wall with a military flag. The Paris defenders saw this scene, and their morale was greatly boosted. Only after the battle started did they truly realize the strength of Paris's city defense. The Parisian soldiers had more advanced weapons, making this raid more challenging for the Vikings than previous ones. Countless Viking warriors died here, and their pride dissipated with them. Bjorn and Rollo courageously charged at the city wall, but were defeated. But Ragnar is still fighting hard, looking at Count Odo and the princess so close to him, but he still can't get close. Looking at Paris, he then chose to give up resistance. His surroundings were filled with Viking corpses, and all the siege equipment was burned by the fire. Bjorn was seriously injured and lost consciousness. Floki tried to sacrifice himself to the Nordic gods but was stopped. This massive siege ended with the defeat of the Vikings. Ragnar led the remnants of the army back to the camp. Count Odo took the king to review his victory. Looking at the Viking bodies, the king felt that the Vikings were not as terrifying as they seemed, and that they could be defeated. The next day, Ragnar found Floki. He told Floki that the war had not ended and the Vikings would not easily give up. He announced that they would launch a surprise attack that night, intending to turn the tide after the previous day's defeat. At night, Lagertha led some people from the waterway to the drawbridge underneath. They successfully climbed the city gate's passage and killed the guards. But when they approached the city gate, they still exposed their locations, and Lagertha had to launch a direct attack. When the Vikings were about to open the city gate, they were discovered by the city guards. Lagertha quickly hid. Then a large number of soldiers rushed out. Lagertha threw a torch at the city gate, and a huge fire spread instantly. Seeing the signal, Viking warriors immediately flocked towards the gate. Count Odo had prepared a countermeasure. Numerous Viking soldiers were crushed to death. However, its range of attack was limited. When Count Odo gave the order to continue the attack, Rollo thought of a way to break the deadlock. The real battle had just begun, and Rollo led the men to fight hard. Count Odo went to the king and reported the military situation. He hoped the king would visit the battlefield to boost morale, but the king refused. So Count Odo had to return to the battlefield with the soldiers following him. The Vikings were still unable to break through because there were too many Parisian soldiers, so Rollo had to retreat. At the moment when the suspension bridge was raised, Rollo successfully crossed the suspension bridge, but Earl Siegfried and Sinrik were left behind. Since Sinrik could understand both languages, she informed the king about the Vikings' situation. Although the king of Paris won the battle, the war had resulted in a large number of patients and numerous deaths. This war had cost both sides dearly. Although they successfully resisted the Viking attacks twice, the king of Paris decided to negotiate peace. So, a Paris envoy, accompanied by a translator, came to Ragnar's camp to conduct negotiations. He expressed their willingness to compensate for the Vikings' retreat, with the specific amount to be decided during the negotiation. After the Parisian envoy left, an argument ensued in the camp. Only Bjorn advocated for negotiation, while others insisted on continuing the fight. At this point, Ragnar stepped forward to announce that as the king, he would make the final decision. The next day, Ragnar secretly leaves the camp to negotiate with Count Odo. Ragnar didn't care about the compensation offered by Count Odo. What he wanted most was to receive Christian baptism, a request that astounded Count Odo.
I am a dying man. And when I die, I want to be reunited with my Christian friend, who happens to be in your heaven.
He says you will go to hell, not heaven.
That is not your decision to make.
When the crowd arrived, they discovered Ragnar getting baptized in a Christian ritual. Everyone was confused by what they saw. Floki was even more infuriated, but they couldn't stop it. Soon, the Parisians brought the agreed compensation, gold and silver. Under the agreement, the Vikings should retreat. However, Ragnar's health continued to deteriorate. He hoped to go to heaven to see Athelstan sooner and asked Floki to build his last ship for him. Back in Paris, to celebrate the victory, the King of Paris held a grand service. The joy of victory made him complacent, but Princess Gisla calmly exposed him. Count Odo expressed his feelings to the princess, but did not receive a response. A month later, the Vikings had not retreated, which puzzled Count Odo. He decided to check the situation himself. Bjorn told him that they could not set sail due to Ragnar's weakness. Count Odo became suspicious and decided to inspect Ragnar's condition himself. Ragnar had one last wish. He hoped to hold a Christian burial ceremony, or the Vikings wouldn't leave. Count Odo agreed, but stated that the funeral procession must not carry weapons. Bjorn accepted his request, which was acceptable to everyone. Ragnar suddenly jumped out of the coffin and held a dagger to the King of Paris's neck. At the same time, the Viking warriors carrying the coffin also picked up the weapons they had hidden in advance and took the nobles next to them hostage. Ragnar plunged his dagger into the throat of the padre who once said he would go to hell. This shocked the King of Paris next to him. The King of Paris never imagined that Ragnar could fake his death and infiltrate Paris. However, Princess Gisla was not afraid. Instead, she rushed forward and tried to resist, and eventually became his hostage. Ragnar took Princess Gisla out of the city, but the King of Paris fainted. As they reached the city gate corridor, Ragnar commanded his men to cut the ropes of the drawbridge. The Vikings successfully entered Paris, and at this point, nothing could stop their assault. However, Ragnar suddenly chose to release the Parisian princess. His behavior caused a subtle change in Princess Gisla's impression of the Vikings. The city gate was broken open by the Vikings, who began to seize Paris. It wasn't until this moment that Ragnar finally felt relieved and collapsed into his son's arms. The Vikings raided the city unrestrainedly, venting their emotions. After massive looting, they quickly left, leaving a hellish scene for the Parisians. When the King of Paris heard from Count Odo that the Vikings had left, he slowly got up. After returning to the camp, everyone was very angry about Ragnar's feigned death, because this is undoubtedly a deep deception for them, and only Bjorn knows the truth. Bjorn confessed that he was just following Ragnar's orders. Seizing Paris was everyone's goal, and everything went perfectly. Under Bjorn's leadership, everyone obeyed Ragnar's orders, prepared to depart home the next day, and planned to return to Paris for plunder in the spring of the following year. He said that Ragnar wanted to keep some people in Paris and needed to leave a leader. Rollo made a choice. He chose to stay because he wanted to know the truth of the prophecy. Upon learning that the Vikings did not completely retreat, the King of Paris was anxious about a possible Viking invasion every day, so he decided to sacrifice Princess Gisla for a political marriage in exchange for peace. The princess strongly opposed the arrangement, but it was all in vain. When the envoy proposed to offer Rollo land and a title, Rollo showed no response. Until they proposed to marry Princess Gisla to him, a smile broke out on his face at that moment. They hoped that Rollo would betray Ragnar and help Paris resist Viking attacks, so he decided to see if the princess was worth his betrayal to Ragnar. The King of Paris held a grand welcoming ceremony in the palace for Rollo. However, Princess Gisla cursed Rollo in front of everyone. Seeing this scene, Rollo seemed to see the shadow of Lagertha in Princess Gisla. On the way back to Kattegat, Ragnar called Floki over. Looking at Floki, Ragnar stated that he already knew it was Floki who killed Athelstan. Given Ragnar's gaze, Floki seemed to be aware of what was about to transpire. Next up is Vikings Season 4, where Rollo completely betrays Ragnar. How will Ragnar face all this? Upon their return to Kattegat, Ragnar, gravely wounded in the battle, had been unconscious throughout. During this time, Bjorn, acting in Ragnar's stead, distributed the gained treasures among the people. Then he held a general meeting, and he began to preach his father's kindness to the people, and then praised Athelstan. He declared that it was because of Athelstan's guidance that they were able to acquire these riches, and Floki is arrested by Bjorn and imprisoned in the square. But his wife Helga is always by his side and brings him food every day. At the same time, due to Ragnar's ailing condition, Aslaug hurriedly sought the seer, wanting to know if she could replace Ragnar as the queen of the Vikings after his death. The seer didn't directly answer her, leaving Aslaug with some confidence. When she got home, Ubi told her that Ragnar had woken up. Meanwhile, Helga also relayed the news to Floki. After listening to his wife's words, Floki had the idea of escape because he knew Ragnar would kill him. Aslaug hosted a banquet for Ragnar, who noticed a female servant. Aslaug informed him that the girl was a slave she'd newly purchased in the slave market. If he was interested, he could use her at will. When Ragnar learned Bjorn had captured Floki, he was furious, believing Bjorn was forcing him into making a decision. Simultaneously, Ragnar also criticized his son's decision of leaving Rollo in Paris, fearing Rollo might betray them. Sure enough, Rollo betrayed Ragnar, killing all the Viking warriors left in Paris. From that moment on, Rollo officially became Ragnar's enemy, betraying the Vikings. Upon Ragnar's blaming, Bjorn contemplated leaving to prove his abilities to his father. Though reluctant to part with his son, Ragnar showed understanding and respected his decision to want to be independent. After Bjorn left, Ragnar turned to Floki, wanting him to admit his mistakes. However, Floki's response seemed defiant to Ragnar, and therefore, Ragnar didn't grant him an opportunity to die. Floki desired a heroic death, hoping to enter Valhalla. But evidently, Ragnar had no intention of allowing him such an opportunity. This is not a tragic punishment. This punishment will not make the gods moved. It will only make Floki feel pain.